The New Quantum Era,
a podcast
by Sebastian Hassinger
and Kevin Roney.
The Assembly will now take a decision on Draft Resolution A/78/L70, entitled International Year of Quantum Science and Technology 2025. May I take it that the Assembly decides to adopt Draft Resolution A/78/L70? It is so decided.
That was a portion of the proceedings of the General Assembly of the United Nations meeting on June 7th, 2024, where they passed a resolution making 2025 the International Year of Quantum Science and Technology. And today's guest is going to be someone who's going to discuss that with us.
Well, we're kind of excited. This is Dr. Paul Cadden-Zimansky we're interviewing today. He's Associate Professor of Physics at Bard. Really interesting guy. He's a ringleader on this whole effort, and lots more to say on really interesting facets of outreach and communications to the larger public on the subject of quantum computing and quantum mechanics.
Let's take a listen. Welcome back to the podcast. Kevin is back with me on this episode. Very happy to have him back. And also joining us, thank you. Also joining us, special guest, Paul Cadden-Zimansky. He's Associate Professor of Physics at Bard University, Director of the Physics program there, and also is on the Executive Committee at APS that has been looking at the UN move to declare 2025 the International Year of Quantum Science and Technology. And Paul just shared with us on Friday that the UN had actually passed the resolution. So now it is official. 2025 will be the year of quantum. And so we immediately, of course, wanted to get Paul on to discuss it. So welcome, Paul. Thanks for joining us. And what's the year of quantum going to be?
That's a great question. So thanks, Kevin and Sebastian, for having me. This is basically a 100th birthday for quantum mechanics. So quantum mechanics, generally, we date back to 1925. And it's not so much to me about what happened in 1925 per se. It's really about the whole past 100 years of all the development. It started as something where a few of us sitting around were like, we should have a 100th birthday party for quantum mechanics because quantum mechanics has brought a lot of joy to our lives, and we should share that with as many people as possible. And so the idea sort of grew out of a number of different interests that people have, and we could talk about the different groups with different interests. But I think the commonality was everybody who understands how important quantum mechanics is would like everyone else who doesn't understand that or doesn't even know what quantum mechanics is to have some introduction or reintroduction to quantum mechanics, right? And to use the 100-year anniversary as a springboard to having more events, more outreach activities, developing new methods of reaching people, and focusing the sort of global attention on quantum mechanics for next year. So that was kind of the original goal, and the way you go about making that happen is you got to send out invitations for the birthday party.
Right.
And so first it's a few people talking among themselves. We started having, I think, more and more people on these Zoom calls internationally from all over the world. And then that grew into various societies and institutes getting on board. So in my case, it was with the APS, the American Physical Society, who really got behind this early on, but also places like the German Physical Society, the Chinese Optical Society is now a founding partner, et cetera. SPIE, which is the Engineering Photonics Optica, which is another optics society. So, and then dozens of physical societies around the world were like, yes, we think this is a good idea. It goes next to the international unions. So for people who aren't familiar, there are these international unions. The earliest ones date from just after World War I. So they're kind of in the League of Nations era.
Wow.
Formed to, like, instead of having wars, maybe we could have some international scientific cooperation.
Wow. Yeah.
So we went to like International Union of Pure and Applied Physics and Chemistry, crystallography, et cetera. And they're all like, yes, we endorse this sort of thing. And then it goes up to the nation state level. So it goes to the country level. And we started at UNESCO, which is the scientific cultural arm of the United Nations, which is centered in Paris. And so my fellow members of the executive committee, who are much more seasoned in science diplomacy than I am, went there and made the rounds and lobbied various nations. And last year we had about 60 countries co-sponsoring this resolution at UNESCO.
Right. And that was an unusually high number, I think, right?
Yeah, that's some real momentum.
Yeah, I mean, these years vary, but I'd say in general, this seems to be an idea that people really got behind. And with a lot of these international year type celebrations, there's no particular reason to have it on like the year it's on. So, for example, this year is the International Year of Camelids. So celebrating camels and alpacas and things like that. There's nothing particularly special, I think, going on in 2024 about camels. Worthwhile thing to focus attention.
Sure.
Yeah, hooray camels.
But we have this 100th birthday party aspect to it. So we have a nice anniversary to focus on. Yeah. And the amazing thing is that at this same moment, there's all this excitement around what's coming next in quantum. So, the working title for this originally was the Quantum Century Project. And it was really about both the past 100 years and the next 100 years.
Right.
And so this moment of all these different countries already having their quantum initiatives being passed, and suddenly realizing, we need to do more work thinking about quantum education, quantum outreach, coincides exactly with this moment. So it's lined up exceptionally well to have a really amazing year. And so I think because of that, a lot of countries got behind it. And we're realizing we do need to work on this.
Yeah.
So UNESCO was basically last year getting through there. They endorsed the idea, and then this spring has been going to the United Nations. And as you mentioned, the official resolution declaring next year the International Year of Quantum was passed on Friday. It's basically by acclamation. So every country in the world said, we're good with this. There's actually about over 70 countries co-sponsoring that resolution. Sort of said, we actually want to put our names on this as well. Including U.S., China, India, but in all sorts of smaller countries. And
Mexico,
it was actually
Ghana is involved. Yeah, it's pretty.
So the Ghanaian delegation was the one who stepped up and said, we really care about this issue. They cared a lot, as they said in their speech at the UN General Assembly on Friday, about hey, we want this brought to Africa too, right? And this is not just about rich countries, but we need to start in all these developing countries. We want to be part of this new quantum revolution as well.
It's such an interesting topic. And, one of the primary goals we heard the Ghanaian representative give around the intro was just public awareness as a primary objective. And I agree with you. I mean, for me, this is the subject of study creates great joy. But for a lot of people, I mean, it's very aggressive mathematical abstractions and very counterintuitive physical outcomes, right? So, I mean, it's always a challenge, right, doing good communication about this stuff because it can be so in a certain sense intimidating and even baffling. How do you make that breakthrough here in this public awareness goal?
Yeah, I think that's exactly the right question. And, for me, it's something that I have a lot of concern about because I teach at a liberal arts college, right? And I'm encountering people who are not just physics majors or science majors, and I have to communicate with them about why this is important.
Yes. Yeah.
And so I think that, right now we have this thing, quantum mechanics, which is so central to, all the physical sciences. and is something, but at the same time is not something where you can sort of point at an object and say that's the quantum, right?
Yes,
like you can point. I mean, you can point at a camel and say that's a camel, and we're celebrating.
Exactly.
Everybody
But what are we pointing at?
How many of them would fit through the head of a pear or the eye of a needle, though? That's the question.
And so, but I guess I turn it around and say, you know what? Since it underlies everything, you can point at any object and say, let's take a look at that object and see how quantum affects that.
Right.
But I think telling those stories without the abstraction, and it's fine to tell stories with the abstraction, but I think that translation is what we really need to work on as a community as a whole. So I have various stories that I worked up and I tell to certain audiences in different cases, but I think we're trying to crowdsource this as much as possible.
Right.
So another way of looking at this is, since everybody has realized this is a critical issue to inform many people about, and at the same time it's so challenging to communicate about, let's all get together and work on communicating in this year, and we'll see what we come up with. And we'll fail. Right? It's an experiment lots of times.
Yes.
But the good stories, the good ways of pointing things out, the good objects to point to and say, here's a story about that quantum underlies. And not just about the technical aspects of like explaining quantum mechanics, but just, how does quantum mechanics affect geopolitics or economies or philosophy? Like those type of questions is not necessarily a technical story. I think as we tell more and more of those stories in this year, the ones that resonate with different sectors of the public all over the world will be picked up. Right. So we're kind of throwing down the gauntlet both to people to ask around the world to say, hey, this is a chance to be introduced for the first time or reintroduced to quantum. And we'll take whatever questions you want to give us. And then the other side, for people who know something about quantum, is a challenge like, okay, do your best to explain in an approachable, friendly, engaging way, non-threatening way, like what it is that you think is interesting about quantum. I think one of a piece of advice I give to people doing quantum outreach is, think about what you're enthusiastic about, right? And your audience will not necessarily remember the things you said, but they'll remember your enthusiasm.
Right.
And if you make that emotional connection, like you've won the battle there.
Right. It's so interesting because, we talk about this a lot on the podcast with guests, that there is this unique moment right now where 100 years of quantum mechanics and quantum science is sort of starting to transition into quantum technologies. It's becoming more explicitly the engine of a particular piece of technology: quantum computer, quantum networking, quantum communications, quantum cryptography,
quantum sensors,
and in large part, I mean, what has been a challenge in science communication, how do you develop a quantum intuition? How do you develop a sense of what the quantum realm is about, is now a matter of skills and creative ideas for what to do with these things, right? I mean, we'll need this kind of quantum intuition in order to come up with the innovation around the applications of quantum computing, for example, which are not entirely clear at this point, right? I mean, that's a huge challenge. And I think, as you said, there's sort of this last 100 years and then the next 100 years, which gives us a really unique kind of threshold moment. And also back to what you were saying about Ghana, the Ghanese delegation, it's a bit of a do-over moment, right? I mean, this is a brand new field of technology, and we get to hopefully build it from the ground up, learning from the mistakes of prior technology fields where there's been, not the kind of equality and diversity and inclusion that we'd like to see. And also, as we've seen in classical computing, it ended up being a hyper concentration of the supply chain, which causes all kinds of geopolitical effects that maybe aren't great, which we would like to avoid as well. So there's a lot on your plate as a member of this committee. Is there, now that it's passed, is there sort of a transition to starting to make more concrete plans for next year at APS?
Yeah. So the way I frame this is, this started out it was very much a grassroots thing with, a few scientists and historians of science, like talking about this idea. And as I went over it, sort of gradually moved its way up to like sort of larger and larger groups and institutions and nation states and United Nations. So we've gone as high up the chain as we can go. We can't go to the Intergalactic Federation or whatever for the declaration of. Yeah,
they may be listening.
If they're listening, next year's
they subscribe to the podcast.
Yeah, there you go.
So now it has to move back down, right? So now it has to go from nations all the way back down, and because we built up a network to go up to that level, that it makes it a little bit easier, a little faster to go back down that direction. So just to give some examples of how this would work, I mean, there is a steering committee that will oversee a global fund which sees things at the sort of highest level. So if you think about the sort of global issue of, how do we make sure that, a region like Africa is included in all this and make sure that there are resources transferred from wealthier countries to poor countries centered around sort of quantum outreach. That's what that committee will oversee. And there is a sort of global fund, which, people can contribute to, businesses can sponsor the International Year of Quantum, if they like. And that will be sort of the main task at that high level. As you move down to, like, let's say, individual countries, right? Each individual country reacts to the United Nations declaration in different ways. But let me give one example. Brazil has a sort of national science week that the Ministry of Education runs in the country every fall. And they look to the UNESCO and United Nations to see what sort of the theme of the year is, if there's a theme of the year. So what we hope is that by this resolution passing to declare next year the quantum year, that Brazil will say, oh, our thousands of events around the country next year are going to have a quantum theme to them, right? And so that just activates that type of thing. In other countries like the United States, nobody pays any attention to what the United Nations says, right? This means effectively nothing, I'm afraid.
Sadly.
There are places like the APS organizations that will, be doing things. So the APS has their biggest sort of meeting of the year in March, and it's in Southern California next year. So they're doing some plans for having a sort of public outreach event around that. But what we really hope is that as many different organizations, companies, institutions, schools, etc., realize, there is this unique opportunity of all gathered around quantum as a theme for the year and do something. So that's how it has to filter down to like the individual level. And in some sense, that's the most impactful level of if somebody can do whatever they do to facilitate some sort of quantum outreach that involves like 2 or 3 people, like that's what we're going for. We just need as many of those as possible for as many different types of audiences in many different places.
Well, here's the first one right here.
That's it.
And Paul, so I mean, if somebody is on the podcast listening right now and they feel inspired to get involved somehow, and they don't really know you yet, I mean, what's their best route if they feel inspired and capable to go to the barricades with you?
Right. So I would say there are maybe 3 things. So number one is like, if you want to give money, you can give money. And if you go like that, you can do that. But if you want to do something, you're like, oh yeah, I want to do something about quantum. You're free to initiate that as you like, right? So this is a 4-year declaration. You don't need our approval to do any of these things.
Just go nuts,
So do what you like. What we'll have towards the end of the year will be a way for people who are doing events or have resources they developed that are online to submit those to the IYQ website, which is quantum2025.org. And then we'll have, a global map and things like that. And we'll be featuring different resources. So if people want to do like that type of thing, go ahead and do that, start planning. But even maybe more simply, in terms of facilitating things happening, sometimes it's just about thinking of like, well, who do I know or what organization do I know that I should be part of? Right. Mm-hmm. So, I'll give just a personal example. We happen to have a speaker who was an astronomer, and she's involved with this program called Astronomy on Tap, where they do events at pubs around astronomy, mostly in the US, but also around the world, right? And they have, events every week. And so I just sent her an email and say, hey, for next year, could you direct people to like try to do a quantum themed event? And she's like, oh yeah, sure. So it didn't take much work for me of just like sending one email, and she already has a network.
She goes, Right.
But even for any individual, think about an email sent to a local school board saying,
Right.
Hey, I noticed that next year is like this big 100 years of quantum mechanics, UN declared, et cetera. What is the school doing about quantum next year? Right.
Yes,
and maybe that goes nowhere, but maybe that prompts people to do things.
And will there be on the IYQ website, will there be sort of like sections for, I'm an educator, what can I, what are some ideas of what I could do in my classroom, that kind of thing?
Yeah, so I think we'll build up more of those and feature more of those. I think you guys have talked probably about the Q12 initiative in the United States, which is, that's kind of one of the main goals, and people from that were involved early on in these discussions. So I think we're going to try to like take good resources that people develop from across the spectrum and feature those and direct people towards those. Some of them will be housed on our website. A lot of them will be like pointing towards other resources.
Yeah. And you mentioned corporate sponsorship. I think, given that across the board, every single national quantum initiative I'm aware of globally has, workforce development and skills development as a top priority, it would definitely behoove large corporations to think about sponsoring this effort, because it's a very, very long process to get to a PhD level training in physics. And there are more and more challenges that are going to require those kinds of skills. So we need to get cracking, definitely.
And throughout our podcast, there's numerous cases where the inspiration for an individual to get into this complicated, formidable field came from just one primary contact with the mysteries, right, of that whole area. So I don't know. It's really, this is a great opportunity to draw new talent into the field.
Yeah, and I would say I think about it as broadly as possible. So on the one hand, in terms of the word quantum, like there is this excitement around this quantum information technologies, and that's a great story that people can be telling. On the other hand, we have a 100-year track record of all sorts of different existing technologies that you can point to. And it is the International Year of Quantum Science and Technology, right? So some people don't care about technology, but they do care about how does the world around me work, right? And how does the natural world work? And quantum is not just about physics, right? It's about chemistry. It's about many other things. Everything physical has quantum in it. And it's not necessarily just about learning the science. It could be about learning how quantum affects politics and why these national quantum initiatives.
Right.
And at the same time, it's not just about reaching those members of the public or young people who are going to become the future quantum scientists, right? I think that, on the one hand, even if you just cared about those people and developing that workforce, those people live in an ecosystem of information. And, if their grandparent learns a little more of quantum and says to the grandkid, I was hearing more about that, that type of interaction can set the sort of expectations for the social environment. And I think if you think about, people in different parts of the world, many individuals will tell their kids being a doctor is a good profession to go into. Right. And so kids will get that in their head. I had a student recently whose parents told him don't go into science. That's not a good path to go into.
Wow.
There's you'll end up in the poorhouse. And I was that's not a message that you would hear in the U.S., but he was from another country. Right. And so if more people around the world get the message, no, actually this is it's a respectable field. And there's plenty of, if you want to make money, there's plenty of money to be made. And the future possibilities are unknown, but very exciting.
Right. That's really cool.
So much potential. And Paul, I understand your team at Bard, you've been working with a bunch of, if I'm not mistaken, fellow students under your supervision around brand new innovations on visualization of these complex systems. I wonder if we could segue to that topic. So interesting, and gateways directly to this International Year of Quantum Technology.
Yeah, so this is about just sort of one strand of my own sort of research and pedagogy interests. I was actually doing a kind of tutorial with a couple students who were working their way through Nielsen and Chang's book on quantum information.
Mike and I did the classic,
and we got through about 1.5 chapters of it with a couple undergrads. But when we came to understand a single qubit and this block sphere representation of that, they asked me this question of, okay, so is there a 2-qubit visualization? And my answer was no. Because I just thought about the number of dimensions and it's no, it's not possible. But then I kind of went home, it was winter break, and I was sort of thinking about what do we mean? Like, what do we want out of visualization? Like, we want a sort of map of the different quantum states of qubit states. Like, what would we like to get out of that map? And what are the tricks we might be able to use to create a map that allows us to see the 2 qubit states and how those evolve?
Yes.
So it took a bit of like, thinking and calculating, but basically came up with a way of doing that. And the trick is to use sort of subspaces of the full space. So a full 2 qubit space, there's two problems with that, even if we're just talking about pure quantum states. So problem number one is that's going to be 6 dimensions. So that's a problem.
For starters, yeah.
For starters. And problem number 2 is the topology of these spaces is also problematic to visualize. So even in 2 dimensions, there's something called a projective plane, which is not a visualizable space. It's 2-dimensional space, but like I cannot think about what the space looks like. So you have to essentially take a subspace, a sort of cross section of this fuller space, and come with a visualization for that. And we thought about different ways of doing that, but we just had this paper accepted to the American Journal of Physics, which is, I think, one of the premier physics education journals in the country. And it's going to be the cover story next month. So I was excited to hear about that.
Fantastic.
On Thursday, yeah. So I got that news on Thursday, and then the UN passed a resolution on Friday. So it was a good
nice week.
Yeah,
not bad. Yeah.
And that paper's up in the archive. People can find it there now.
We'll link to it in the show notes. And I'll also put a link to the website that you shared with us where you can actually play with some of these visualizations. It's really fun, actually.
Yeah. And so the point of these visualizations is, the paper itself, I would say you probably need a kind of like undergraduate familiarity with quantum mechanics to read through the whole thing. But you can take pieces of that and translate that down to a much lower level of like, here's a sort of first image to point to understand the map of quantum states. And I'm actually working with a group called CPEP, which does physics education posters primarily for high schools. And they have posters about, gravitation and nuclear physics and things like that. So we're developing a quantum poster for next year. And I've taken some of these pictures and translated those downstream to like the sort of high school level, just like kind of cartoons, but they tell you the sort of very, very basics, in this case, just of single qubits. And I think one thing I realized in sort of working on this paper was that everybody is drawing their block sphere incorrectly. Or maybe
I saw that in the paper. That was
so put it more charitably, like this sphere is this map of sort of all possible single qubit states. But if you try to think about, okay, I want to read from a point on the map to particular values like probabilities or particular numbers in my state vector representation or particular entries in my density matrix. Like, can you read off those numbers from your map? Can you go back and forth? Or given the numbers, can you plot that on the map? And it turns out that people have picked the block sphere typically to have a radius of 1. And the reason for that is that they like to think about state vectors as being normalized, having length of 1. And so they're like, well, then the points on the surface of the sphere, which are the pure states, those should be at sort of distance 1 from the center. Sure. But it turns out if you just make a minor switch, and I'm sure there's other people who know this, but I never found it anywhere in textbooks or on the Wikipedia article or whatever. Yeah. If you make a switch and change the radius to be 1/2 and scale it, all of a sudden, like all the numbers in the density matrix and the column vector representations and the probabilities all become much more directly readable off the diagram. And so it's really simple. And I mean, I ran across this video over the weekend of this guy who was talking about calculating density matrices. So for those who don't know, a density matrix is something you would use to figure out if you have a qubit that might be in this state, might be in this state, or might be in this state, but you don't know. It's a kind of epistemic probability. Like, how can I encapsulate that in one matrix? And so in this case, he uses an example of like, well, maybe I have a spin points up, 1/3 chance of that, 1/3 chance is pointing down, and 1/3 chance is pointing to the right. And then you go through this long algebraic calculation to figure out what this matrix is. But when we got to the end of that, I realized, you know what? I could have found that matrix in my head. I can think about the picture, and I know how to move those points around, and I know the lengths, and I could just read off the entries from that. And that's kind of stunning that like you could just do that without doing a bunch of algebra. And then there would be a follow-up question of like, that was a matrix written down in a particular coordinate system, particular basis. And if I ask the follow-up question, like, instead of writing that in the up-down basis, write that in the right-left basis.
The left, right, yeah.
Like most people would go back to the drawing board. They would have to bring in some other unitary matrices to do
and
the
rerun
rotation,
the entire
thing.
calculation.
I can again do that in my head. Right.
Yes,
and just because I understand the geometry of the block sphere with this adjustment about the radius. And pretty much everybody I showed this to realizes like, oh, this is actually much better. But I think we're probably going to have an easier time getting the United Nations to declare International Year than getting people to change their block sphere radius.
That's great, man.
We'll see. But anyway, so that's the start of the paper. So we're talking about that. And then this 2-qubit visualization, which was useful mainly because it allows you to have, like, again, a single point moving sort of through a space. And this space turns out to be kind of a weird shape. It's a donut with a donut-shaped hole in it. So if you imagine like a cream-filled, well, I guess not properly, like a regular donut with a donut shape hollowed out inside the donut. You bit into the donut, there's a hole inside. So you move through that space, and this is why it's hard. That's much harder to visualize. This is why we made these online visualizations.
Right.
You actually can get a very nice set of subset of states, of 2-qubit states that exist. And it also, a lot of the logic gates that you use in quantum information, like, CNOT gates, Hadamard gates, rotation gates, like those all just map within the subspace. They map points in the subspace to itself. And
so a really powerful pedagogy tool in that respect, because I mean, the gates could be formidable for people who are like getting into the subject anew. Yeah.
Well, and that was my first thought when I was playing with the 2-qubit gate visualization is are you going to do, it would be great just to have buttons of the standard gates down below and like hit it and just watch the transformation of the state. That would be super powerful.
That's something we'd like to work on. So, I mean, I work at an undergraduate only institution. So Bard College doesn't have a graduate program or graduate students. So it kind of is up to whether there's an undergrad who wanders into my office who's like, I want to do a programming project related to this, whether it happens or not.
Yes.
Well, I mean, I've heard the International Year of Quantum is coming up, so maybe there'll be more motivation.
Yeah. And if somebody sees those and is like, I want to make a better updated version, like, please, I'll send you the codes. You can copy them as much as you like.
Have you thought about making it an open source project?
Yeah, I think it's on GitHub, the particular JavaScript into those
already,
which we should probably link to that repository if people want to get it. But you can download
That's
it
a whole other sort of, we talked about sort of, education communication, but I think there's a huge role potentially for the International Year of Quantum to enlist more software developers to start working on these open source projects. Because the thing I've learned from working with the Unitary Fund, who do a bunch of micro grants to support open source quantum software development and do a Unitary Hack, which is on right now annually to enlist people to start hacking away at quantum software repos, is that a classical developer can be very useful in these software development projects without having a PhD level of quantum knowledge necessarily. So it's a great sort of collaboration starting point between someone who's more classically skilled and somebody who's got the quantum skill base.
Right. And yeah, you don't need a lot of background. And the most complicated visualization on there was programmed by a student who I think he started as a junior undergraduate. Right.
Amazing. That's awesome. That's
awesome. Really cool. A lot of great motivators to read the paper. I mean, just the beauty of the visualization, the ability to do, in your head, basic calculations for density matrices. I mean, it sounds like a strong and very exciting read. So I can't wait to take it at greater length. Thank you for that, forwarding that to us. That was really cool.
I think that, one thing that the paper foregrounds a little bit that I'm a big evangelist on is introducing much earlier mixed states and density matrices, just the concept of mixed states.
Yes,
and the barrier to that, though, has been, it was challenging enough to deal with sort of vectors with pure states, but now you deal with matrices. Now you're into tensors and things like that. Yeah. So it's incredibly useful to have a visualization that you can turn to, like before you get to the math. Here's this. I mean, most people in their head have a kind of a visual image of a vector. And so even when I talk about a complex abstract Hilbert space vector, people still rely on the idea of that. But if I say, when you talk about a matrix, what's the picture in your head? You may not have any picture, right? And so part of this is sort of giving you more of a picture in your head for like, here's a sort of point in space that corresponds to a matrix that you can move around, which is, I think, going to be, very useful for moving downstream this idea of mixed states, which I think are so incredibly important to understanding the sort of basic categories of things in quantum mechanics.
Yes, yeah.
Awesome.
So beautiful. Really cool.
That's really great. And it is, and it does feel like a poster child, if you will, for the type of thing that I hope we see more of during this International Year of Quantum, because it makes it more accessible. It's a tool for building intuition and introducing and putting more attention on these incredibly powerful concepts that have enormous potential for us all. As the science and the technology develops. So thank you so much, Paul, for joining us. This has been really, really great. I'm super excited about the UN resolution. I'm super excited about what you have planned for 2025.
Oh, thanks so much for having me. Yeah.
Wow, that was so cool. Just a really ambitious effort, really, that public outreach on helping people understand both the joy and the power of these ideas. I mean, it's such an ambitious project. I'm really impressed they took this one on. But now is the time. It's this centennial
That's
year,
right?
I mean, 1925, so pivotal, right, in the history. So really cool stuff. And also, I got to tell you, man, I was just excited to have it's a little bit of back and forth on the subject of visualization of quantum systems. It's been a private obsession or fascination of mine for some years. I mean, how to take that on. So a brand new research breakthrough in that subject was actually pretty cool.
Yeah, really cool. Yeah, and I really liked, it really was a concrete example of the type of thing that the International Year of Quantum hopefully will enable and promote. It's such a difficult subject to build from scratch a quantum intuition.
Oh, yeah.
And I think that things like that are, it'd be very easy just to sort of take as rote the Bloch sphere, and, sort of the music notation, formatting of writing circuits.
Right.
But they both have significant drawbacks, and they're both things that need that constant, reassessment and improvements that will make them more powerful and more accessible. So it was really great to see that.
So fantastic.
Yeah, it was awesome. So thanks, Kevin. Thanks for rejoining us on the podcast. I'm really happy to have you back. Yeah. You were missed. The fans were clamoring for your return.
You're killing me. Thank you. You're very kind.
Ghana also thanks UNESCO and UNCTAD for all the support provided prior to the negotiation of the resolution, as well as all delegations who have co-sponsored the resolution. Lastly, we look forward to an observance that will make a difference and invite all member states, members of the specialized agencies, observers of the General Assembly, as well as organizations within the United Nations system and other international and regional organizations, academia, civil society, the private sector, and other relevant stakeholders to support the implementation of this resolution, proclaiming 2025 as the International Year of Quantum Science and Technology. I thank you for your attention.
Okay, that's it for this episode of The New Quantum Era, a podcast by Sebastian Hassinger and Kevin Roney. Our cool theme music was composed and played by Omar Costa Hamido. Production work is done by our wonderful team over at Podfi. If you are at all like us and enjoy this rich, deep, and interesting topic, please subscribe to our podcast on whichever platform you may stream from. And even consider, if you like what you've heard today, reviewing us on iTunes and/or mentioning us on your preferred social media platforms. We're just trying to get the word out on this fascinating topic and would really appreciate your help spreading the word and building community. Thank you so much for your time.